Hello and welcome to the Cloud A2K Bluebeam series for Get to Know Your Bluebeam Provider. Today we're going to go over finding differences to drawings where drawings aren't clouded properly, and I've been guilty of this myself when I was doing consulting, issuing drawings out to the builders marked up as required. So let's go through and find those changes and where we can see them easier with Bluebeam. Just run over the agenda for today. So just want to do a little introduction about Bluebeam and what is covered in this series. Then we're going to see review in action. We're going to look at tracking changes to drawings, split pages, overlay pages, compare documents, batch overlays to documents, and batch compare. And I'll try and get you some little tips and tricks along the way as well. And we'll also feature in 2019. So some little added extras inside there as well. And if there's any questions, we'll put them at the end. So just a little bit about Cloud A2K. So we see ourselves as a company that there's a lot of software out there. There's a lot of different ways you can use the software, and it's how they integrate into another. Some are just simple, exporting out, like we can from Excel, Bluebeam, into Excel. But then how we can use that information to other software, where BIM is coming more and more apparent inside the industry, but we're still using a lot of 2D as well. So where can we get these two forms of data to talk to another? And just a bit of background about Bluebeam itself. So I can see, founded back in 2002, but we're used by up to 99% of US contractors. And now in Australia, I think we're up to 95% of Australian top tier contractors as well. So a little bit about myself. My name is Shano Calladay. I work for Cloud A2K as a Bluebeam A2K as a Bluebeam specialist. But I've had previous work in structural engineering with some decent projects, and you can see on the left, Melbourne Emporium. But I've used Bluebeam for quite some time, and if you heard me do any talks before, I'll tell everyone again, I was not a very good user. In fact, this example case where I'm using overlays in comparison, I was not doing that at all inside Arcadis. That was my fault. I pulled apart Revit well enough, but not Bluebeam to understand the full functionality and how could I use that in my day-to-day life. So what do we cover in this series? So basically it's 4 main points that we really feel it's important for construction. We're going to go over these changes to drawings that are not clouded today. You'll see also in these webinar series, the tracking site issues and value management for cost reduction. So going to studio sessions, a lot of companies have been doing that all over the place. And lastly, we're going to look at poor data information on site. So how to get better information. 3D PDFs is a really good example where you might not have people that can use Navisworks or any other sort of Celebri or Revisto or so forth, but just give them a 3D PDF so they're inside the Bluebeam environment, user interface, it's a great workflow. So part of this as well, we've had microbrewery events. I've had a chance to come along to one of those in Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne, and next year we'll have more of those as well. And have a look out for these events and where they are located near you. Billy, edit that one out. All right, Bluebeam Revu. Let's have a talk about this, improving efficiency with increased revenue, reduced costs, and minimizing risk. What we're really talking about here with all these options is just consistency. I'll always point out to people, I want you to think about Bluebeam as not just a PDF as in a printed piece of paper that we put on a table and make some notes into it. We can put data into this. So we want is then consistency in data and transparency in the data, or just at least information, right? Same thing. However you want to say it. So our old paper markups where we're using transcribing with a pen, and it becomes dead information. It's hard to add more value to this and also get it across to many people. How we're doing this within Bluebeam is through the metadata. And everyone loves the word data, data lake, data analysis, but basically it's just through that information. So we can put hyperlinks onto this, hyperlinks to other documents, hyperlinks to sites, websites for products. We can put bookmarks. Often when we do reports for clients, it'll be bookmarks. If you print from Word, it just makes it quicker and easier for people to use. File attachments, images, spaces. If you're an architect or you're doing any sort of pricing, have a look at spaces. We're not going to cover it today, but it's worth having a Google to see how it works and make your workflow better. And lastly, with 3D data, which is going to be part of this webinar series. So have a look out for that. So lastly, what I'm going to point out to you that as much as we do have this whole BIM workflow out there, and I've been part of the BIM environment for quite some time, I'm well aware of the BIM battle, I would call it. And so as much as that might work at one level, at another level when we go on site and we're seeing paper, then I just want to point out there is an entire Bluebeam workflow from quantity takeoffs, collaborative review, drawing management, document management, and field issues all on the same PDF. Or as we go from revision to revision, we can copy that data from one version to the other. What we're really talking about here is making a storyboard out of your PDF. This is the project. Imagine looking at the architectural drawings. This is the setup that's required. But how do we build this? If you're a plumber, if you're a builder, if you're the glazier, how was the installation process? What was your order you did in? Was there any issues on sites? Was there RFIs? We can put this data into this information. All right, enough of PowerPoint. I'm a tech guy. I don't want to see PowerPoint too much. So let's have a look inside Bluebeam. I always like to do this little demonstration. So what we're going to talk about here is split pages, just down the bottom left-hand corner down here. And in split pages, what we're really looking at is probably the most. So today we're going to look at like 3 different ways, or probably multiple ways actually. We're going to compare drawings, the differences, overlay, compare, and this one split pages is actually important too. The reason why I want to show you this is probably the most similar workflow to printing paper out and putting it onto your desk. So let's have a look at this. So I'll have a vector image on my right, a raster image on my left, and I'm going to use the synchronize button. So with this, so a little tip is that's in tools, toolbars, and into status bar, F8. Next tip is once you get into this, you want to do review, profiles, and save your profile. Okay. So now that's going to be there for every time you start Bluebeam. You're going to have these little buttons. Just turn those ones off for a moment. With our synchronize on, I can have my raster here and zoom in. And I can see that the other page is following exactly. This is very good to see if a markup has been changed. It might be an internal markup. You want extra notes. You want to look at your old markup. Did they get all those notes right? Yes, they did. In this example, though, what I'm trying to show you is the differences between raster and vector. Now, raster is just an image, where vector is thousands of little dots that make up the entire PDF. So what we can see here, if I keep zooming in, it's just crystal clear and sharp. The vector image allows us to just keep zooming in to the limitations of Bluebeam. And it stays nice and sharp. Where on the raster, it's quite pixelated. So what this really comes into effect is, this is just an image, and this is real text. And we can pick this up with one of the tools inside here, which is select text down the bottom. And we can say this, oops, if I select it properly, a vestibule. And we copy and we can paste the word vestibule in there, which also points out we could do a search on the word vestibule. If I try this on the raster, I got nothing. It just doesn't work at all. I like to point out to people time and time again, I might as well get these stare and plan and ask Bluebeam, what word is that? It just means nothing. I do want to point out to you, if you have an extreme version, you have OCR, which is optimized character recognition, and you can run that. And at that processing, we'll find anything that looks like a letter and puts an invisible letter on top. So you'd see the computer would see an invisible V, E, S, T, and all the way through so we have a vestibule that we can search. All right, so that's just one method. And you could use this to split up to 16 times to compare architectural, structural, mechanical. It is relying on the fact that they're all in the same area. So zooming right in might not necessarily work, but it's a nice way if you've got decent sized drawings and you want to find some comparisons. So let's look at some other ways. These other ways, to be honest, are better. That's a very nice, simple way. You can go back into file access. Don't need to see my demo anymore. I want to look at my overlay and my compare. So here's a set of drawings that I want to do a comparison on. Got a C2 and a C3. So one of the easiest ways we can do this is go into Document, Overlay Pages, and we'll have these two different documents. There could be multiple pages, and we can go through into page 1 against page 3 in case we've got different orders. But let's just run over these, and we'll say OK. The brilliant thing about this tool is that it converts raster or vector into either red or green or whatever color you've chosen. You can do up to 7 different overlays, and it turns them into layers. If you used AutoCAD, these would be like AutoCAD layers. So the C2 has been changed to green, C3 has been changed to red, and where they match, it converts that to black. So if I put on my, I think I've got thick lines on. Okay, grid extent looks like it may have changed or something. Fair enough. Let's have a look what else has changed. The bathroom here. Now this is a very small change in the layout. If you're the tiler or the plumber, this could have significant changes to you, and this could be part of the variation. You just want to track these changes. How important are they? The door swing was clouded, so we got that picked up, but it looks like it wasn't picked up. So C3, that's interesting. C2 is not showing up, but you want to get these little door swings. It's interesting the amount of little things that people perceive as insignificant, but actually quite important to other people inside the industry. Let's have a look at another workflow. So, I just want to point out, by the way, that it creates an overlay file. So original files are left intact. I know when I've done some training and setting up for councils, you are not allowed to make any modifications to the original file, but that's no problem here because we have this in an overlay file. And this can be saved out and left out as a, as a timestamp of these are the changes that happen. If you are a contractor on site and you want to look at saving these, you might look at using this tool here, the snapshot, or G is your shortcut key, and say, I'm going to take a snapshot of this. I could then go to a new PDF or my email. So if I do a new PDF, I'll just use this regular one. I can paste this down. So I could add this to a variations PDF and say, well, there's been a change here, or an RFI to quantify it. Okay. So let's have a look at another method. And go to Document, and now Compare Documents. In this method, we get to choose just 2 different files. But that's not to say that each file can't contain 30, 40, 50 drawings. So it can actually go into the drawings inside here. In this method, it will split our documents, and it's going to put a cloud around the differences. So we'll pick up all those little changes that we had for our grid. They're showing up. And we had a dimension added here. And it's picked up that the wording in the women's toilets and the men's toilets has made some changes. So what's worth noting about this tool is it's a really great workflow for anyone using Revit, because you might have drawings you issued, say, 2 weeks ago, a month ago, whatever. They've been issued onto AIConnect or ProjectWise, wherever you're going to. And you made some changes, maybe if it's in AutoCAD. And then you just want to check that all the clouds have been picked up. You can run this process with what you're about to issue and let Bluebeam be the markup tool to say, well, this is where your clouds are. I mean, personally, we don't need to cloud up the fact that the grid lines have changed enough. Fair enough, we can ignore this. But, you know, this dimension dropping off, was that an accident or was that something that's required? We can actually, it is help flagging this. Just taking away that user error. Once again, let's create a different file, an overlay file that we can use to compare and save out. So what if you want to compare different consultants, or what if, let's have a look. Going to our drawing number 2. But what if the architect or the engineer has moved the drawing? Well, I've had a client that was asked about, what about 1 to 20 details? Quite often they'll move around a little bit between revisions because there's always extra information added and extra details added. Things have to be moved over and shuffled, and just the overlay doesn't work. So we have this opportunity in both overlay and compare, but I prefer in overlay, to be honest, where we can actually use align points. So inside here, we can say, right, snapping on my snap to content. I've put some little cheats in here so I don't miss it in my demonstration, but I want to pick up 3 points that are common in both files. Boundary line works a treat because you've got nice corners. Grid lines, not always, because sometimes they don't intersect, which is a bit frustrating, but we should have a fairly good indication. So you might be a builder that's done a whole costing of all the different areas. So you do your pricing, and then I'm just going to do a final check that my slab layout and all my quantities are going to work, because they definitely coordinate with the architect, because unfortunately my volumes from the structural engineer, but my set outs from the architect. So I need to make sure we've got an alignment here. So you can actually see we've got different size drawings as well, but we can follow this in, and it's hard because we've got different consultants, but we can see the slab edge. That's what I'm focusing on. We have the same information. And while we're here, I just want to point out, part of 2019, they've updated the rendering engine. There's actually a hardware accelerator in here now that's, we can, when we do, it's actually using the proper hardware itself. And I'm trying to point out to you that when we do the panning, we have a partial render, which you can see inside this. So in the past, it would have to do a nice full render, where in this new version, we can keep it on partial render. So even though it's rendering much quicker, we can still ignore the fact that it hasn't finished rendering before we can move on. This is a huge bonus for just navigating around the page. All right, so once again, this can be saved out. You can isolate layers, you can do multiple versions. You can add this to MEP on top and see what their coordination is for penetrations. Let's have a look at another option. If we go into some batch tools, and I want to do the batch overlay pages, I can come into here and just choose a folder. Now this is fantastic because it just means I don't have to go through any information individually. So if I go to my documents here, batch overlay compare. So I received these drawings here from the architects. Latest architectural drawings way back in 2017. Okay. All the drawings come through, and there could be multiple drawings. So this is interesting also for shop drawings. You might receive 50 shop drawings, but sometimes got sheet 1 of 2, 2 of 2, or even up to 3 or 4 pages at times. I go through into the folder. I'm going to pick the next revision and have this compare. Interesting enough, we have several drawings in here, up to 5. And we only have 2 drawings in here. So we don't have to go through the file itself and compare apples and apples. We can have apples and oranges as far as quantities. Come through, match properties. And then we'll get Bluebeam to actually find the similarities that AO2 revision 1 looks like it has a match for AO2 revision 2, AO41, AO42. And these ones here have been unmatched. There seems to be no match for this. So we can actually do this ourselves. There's also options if you want to do it manually. Unfortunately, not all drawings are labeled properly or filed properly, so there's that manual process. Let's go to OK. We're going to see Bluebeam's going to write a report for us. So let's have a look at this report where we're going to save this information. Open the file after creation. Yes, please. So what we have is a full report, which can be then nicely saved out, where we have this drawing versus this drawing and what the differences was. So this is going to do a big comparison, and we've got that nice little storyboard of red and green and how they relate to one another. We've also got the layers as well, so it's very easy to distinguish what's happening here. This is a really great process to speed things up. We could also use this with the clouding tool. And interesting enough, down in the bottom of Bluebeam, if I actually just throw in a regular cloud and say, we did a compare documents and we had a clouding option. I'm just going to turn this on to highlight. All this information that will come through in all the clouds, we can actually markups, export that, and you can actually import that into another file. So now I want you to imagine a workflow where you could do 100 drawing sheets versus another 100 drawing sheets and do an overlay of those drawing sheets and then do a compare and then get the compares clouds to copy and paste into the overlay. So you got this great little storyboard, bit of a workflow, but what it's going to tell you very quickly is, imagine, I've only got one drawing sheet here, but imagine I've got 20, 30, 50, whatever you want. And I'm going to jump from cloud to cloud and get Bluebeam to identify where it finds those changes. So instead of me looking over the document, scouring it for little changes here and there, it's just going to be using the clouds. Another workflow it's worth pointing out, I've done in Revit before, which is you might use, so the column, the walls in this drawing. This is just a house, it's quite simple, but you might have an entire warehouse, you might have an entire shopping center, and you want to do the comparison of architectural walls versus structural walls. It'd be interesting, I've tried it in Navisworks, but there's always little differences between them, a little 1 millimeter here or there, and Navisworks will find many, many differences. So we just want to find in the general layout. So if you're the builder, or if you're maybe in a consulting company and you've got accessing to Revit, of course. If you're loading in one file, you can isolate the walls, do a print, turn off that file, turn on the other consultant's file, isolate those walls and hit print. Then get Bluebeam to find the differences. I remember myself many years ago using Revit to find the coordination issues between structural columns and architectural columns for a big shopping center. And it was all steel columns. It was several hundred structural columns everywhere. I was using Revit, it was taking a long time. I was doing prints, I was zooming in, but I tried this again once I started working for A2K and found it to be much, much quicker because I could get Bluebeam to spot the difference for me with all the clouds. Much quicker workflow, easier way. So think smarter, don't work harder. Okay, that concludes ours today. If you have any questions, please drop us an email and we can get back to you about any of these workflows. And thank you for your time. Yeah.